Guys, my name is Scofflia. Welcome to my channel, and I'm going to talk to you today about 16 life lessons you're going to get from Napoleon the Great. Now, look, I don't know why I've read 2,000 pages on him. He just stumbled into my life like not too long ago. It was a book called Leadership in War by Andrew Roberts. I read it, and one leader stood out. I think this talks about 8 leaders: Nelson, Hitler, Churchill, Margaret Thatcher. But Napoleon blew them all away, in my opinion. Absolutely destroyed them, and he was a complete leader. And after reading the Leadership in War, I went on to read Andrew Roberts' full book on Napoleon called Napoleon the Great. People think Napoleon was like a French Hitler. No, he wasn't, right? Completely opposite. Never, ever, ever compare the both. It's completely different. No, he wasn't a midget. People think he's really short. He was 5'5", which is short at today's age, but back then it was average height. And people call it the Napoleon complex. He didn't even have one. When it comes to how great this guy was, when he got captured by George Home on the I'm butchering the name, Balathrion, but I can't even say it, boat, right? This guy was like, it's amazing, this is what he said in his memoir, he's like, it's amazing what such a small creature, human creature, like ourselves, can do in such a short lifespan. But there's been more books written by Napoleon than Jesus, Mohammad, Alexander the Great, Caesar. My flatmate at the time, I was reading this book, and I asked her, do you know who Napoleon is? And she said, is that a pasta? A pasta? I mean, like, come on guys, like, I mean, if you think he's a pasta, if you think he's a tyrant or a hero, you're gonna get something from this video. You're gonna get 16 life lessons. So let me get on with it, and let's get to it. So the first lesson is lead from the front. He didn't believe in having captains who had not experienced in war. He wanted skin in the game. He wanted to be at the front. His presence animated his soldiers, and he always wanted the people to know he was working hard, relentlessly. He put up bulletins to the camp being like, I haven't pulled my boots off for a week. That's how much I'm working. And he wanted people to know he was working. He was in the trenches working. It was very different to the generals back then. They were like miles behind the line. They didn't want to get killed. So, authentic leadership, do the work, lead from the front. Number 2, simplicity is everything. He believed in simplicity so much, right? Didn't want to complicate things. One of the main things he did, and this is not even in fighting, it was back in in Paris, there was 14,000 decrees and loads of regional laws. It's super complicated in France. What he did, he unified it into one code, the Napoleon Code, right? And after he did that, he did education reforms. So 42% of French could speak French or read, well, speak or read in French at the time, or write, right? Which is not much at all. There's like over 9 languages spoken in France, and he knew, like, for us to move forward as a nation, we're gonna have to make sure that everything is done in French. The law, the letter of the law, communications, the education is all done in French, and he did that. And within like 10 or 15 years, the French secondary schools became the best performing secondary schools in Europe, and still are to this day, right? So an amazing feat. And he was much more than just a leader. He was like, he always thought about things, let's simplify it, make it easier for everyone, and that's what he did. Number 3, be okay with not knowing everything. So this is a quote from him, and I want to say it because I love it. Know how to listen and be sure that silence often produces the same effect as does knowledge. And then he goes on to say, my favorite quote, do not blush to ask questions. How many of you worry about asking questions because you worry about looking stupid? Yes, I do it, we all do it. But this is a guy at the zenith of his power, the emperor. He also chaired over 50% of meetings about, like, you know, foreign affairs, marriage, divorce, all this type of stuff. And what he would always say is, in the meetings, he'd say, is this fair? Is this useful? That's his main thing, right? He always thought that. So, coming back to like not knowing everything, he wanted to be on the chair of these meetings. He wanted to ask, is it useful? Is this fair? Get the opinions of people. And you compare that with Hitler, who never wanted opinion. He always like sycophants around him, completely different. Number 4, be an omnivorous reader. So back in his home in Corsica, he read all the books in his father's library. He went to military school, devoured all the books there. And the funny thing about Napoleon is, and he was a humorous person, is he would send girls he was seeing, his girlfriends, books to read because he wanted their opinion. He's like, right, and I do it, and I know people do it, but it's kind of like funny to know. He's like, right, read this, let me know what you think. He loved the reading. Focus to converge your strength and focus in one point. This is number 5. So Napoleon had the capacity to maneuver his troops faster than the enemy. He had the corps system. He didn't invent it, but he was the first one to bring it to the battlefield properly. And he kept his forces only a day's march apart. So if he had 5 people across the front line, they were only a day's march apart. So within 24 hours, all of them could convene into one place and attack. And they would go on to win because they would be able to outnumber the enemy. Even if the enemy outnumbered them in total, they could outnumber the enemy in one location for that decisive split second and win the battle, right? So this is what he says. Nothing is so important in war as an undivided command. There should be one army acting upon one base, conducted by one chief, right? You believe that. Number 6, plan all kind of outcomes to the end, even if they don't go your way. So most people are like, well, this is what I'm going to do and then that's going to work out. And they looked in the Bavarian archives to look at the Battle of Austerlitz, which is one of his most famous wins, an insanely powerful battle. You know, he just destroyed the troops, the Austrian troops. And they looked at the sketches he did of what was going to happen during the battle and how accurate they were to what actually happened. So he'd be like, we do this, they do that. He already knew what he's going to do if something didn't go to plan. And people are like, wow, you're a genius, how did you know? And he was like, I've already thought it through, mate. All I'm doing is thinking things through, and then when the time comes, boom, 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 I've already got the knowledge in my head. Number 7, compartmentalize your mind for greatness. He had a mastery over himself, right? And I'm going to quote this, big quote this, but it's super important. And he says this after he lost everything, right? He was kind of looking back at his own life. In my own case, it's taken me years to cultivate self-control to prevent my emotions from betraying themselves. Only a short time ago, I was the conqueror of the world, commanding the largest and finest army of modern times. That's all gone now. To think I kept all my composure, I might even say preserved my unvarying high spirits, yet don't think that my heart is less sensitive than those of other men. I'm a very kind man, but since my earliest youth, I've devoted myself to silencing that chord within me that never yields a sound now. If anyone told me when I was about to begin a battle that my mistress, whom I loved to distraction, was breathing her last, it would leave me cold. So he did feel emotion. Yet my grief would be just as great as if I'd given in to it. And after the battle, I should mourn my mistress if I had the time. Without all this self-control, do you think I could have done all I've done? And he's just explaining, do you think I could have done all of what I've done with Napoleon's life? Compartmentalization. So I mean, one part of your life's going to shit, and then the other stuff, you've got to hold it together. We all try and do this, and some of us can't, some of us do it really well. But you have to be able to do it, I think. And especially in business, if you've got a bad business day and then personal life's interrupting it, like it's really hard to kind of separate them. But if you can do it, it's like you know, that is like a superpower. Number 8, moral factors account for 75% of the whole strength, only 1/4. So 75% moral, 25% strength. He says this, more battles are lost by loss of hope than loss of blood. Very, very true. He understood this so much, right, that he would get his generals to inspect his soldiers for 8 hours at camps. They'd arrive at camp and like, right, mate, you're going to look at these soldiers one by one. And you're going to look at them, you're going to look at their boots, you're going to look at their gun, you're going to ask them how they're doing, how their family, they're getting paid on time. All this stuff, he'd make sure that they were seen to. And no other general at the time was doing it. And General Washington, the English one, he treated his men like dogs. Number 9, use gamification, right? So Napoleon addressed troops in billboards in the camps. He would list off stats of like enemies killed, he'd list off stats of like victories, flags captured, cannons shot, cannons captured, generals caught, all that stuff, and he would, you know, spur on these people in the camps. So this leads on to number 10, he created a reward system. So life lesson really here is like, if you're leading the team, if you're doing anything, create a reward system, loyalty system. He believed in reward in service, and he invented the Légion d'honneur, if I'm saying that right, to reward civilians and soldiers. It's very important. Nobles, it doesn't matter if you were high class, low class, everybody was eligible to win something. And he would say to people, like, if you think that you don't understand. These medals and stuff, you think they don't mean anything. This is what's always led men. Back in history, this has always led men. These games, these titles, these honours have always led men. Just, you know, if you don't believe in it, fine, but it's just the truth. Number 11, aim for the imperial purple, but act like a soldier. So when he became emperor, obviously, he was famous for his battles, right? People were scared of him, he'd win all the battles. I think he won 46 out of 60 battles. And people were like obviously worried about fighting him. But when he became emperor, people thought he might chill out a bit. but he went to battle and led from the front as emperor. And he would tell people, he'd tell the enemy, your master wanted to remind me that I'm a soldier. I hope he will own that the imperial purple has not caused me to forget my first trade. He's like, I'm emperor, cool, but don't you forget, mate. I'm a general, I'm a soldier, and I'll always be one. I'll always lead from the front, no matter how high status I get. Number 12, you don't need to be bigger and stronger all the time, only for a decisive moment. He understood that you don't need to be the biggest and the strongest to always win. Timing, and like I mentioned earlier, overflowing the enemy at the right moment was more important than huge amounts of numbers. And at one point, he had 25-1 odds against him. So you had one soldier, then the enemy had 25. So the Allies had 1 million soldiers. Napoleon had 30,000 untrained soldiers. Most of his men died in Russia. Think about that, that's crazy. He led from the front, he animated his men, simplicity, timing. He just brought that authority as well, and people loved him. And that's what you got to do if you want to lead. Number 13, look after your people. He also made sure that people, he's extremely polite to people. One person he met 10 years prior, so he met him again 10 years later, and he asked him about his daughters. And the guy was like, what? How does he know about my daughters? He only met me for a brief second 10 years ago. And he really wanted to remember, he gave time to people, he wanted to remember the small details, because he went massive, it was so important to him. And that's why people were so loyal to him. He actually cared so much about them. Number 14, make use of dead time. So on journeys with his carriage, with his wife Josephine, instead of just being in the carriage and it's probably hard to read himself, he made sure that his wife would read to him. He'd get his wife to read to him when possible, like his personal Audible. He had Audible back before it launched, and he'd make sure that on his carriages he was getting things read to him, listening to read books, letters, whatever, that he wasn't wasting his time. So he made sure that every second of the day mattered. He lived with urgency. What unused capacity can you use? There's a question for you. Number 15, have a laugh. What makes Napoleon unique, right, is that he actually had this dry sense of humour. And once his aide-de-camp, the guy next to him on a horse, had his helmet blown off by a cannon, and Napoleon laughed and said to him, you're lucky you're not tall, mate. You're lucky you're not tall, mate. And it's these dry sense of humour moments between his soldiers, they kind of broke the tension and made yeah, you have to laugh, really. It's serious, of course, but you have to be able to take a bit of a laugh. And finally, be offensive first. Napoleon only fought for 5 defensive battles and he lost 40% of them. So he used to wrestle the initiative and don't let it go. That's what he did, and that was his main motto. So starting on the back foot's never ideal, and you should never want to start on the back foot. You should never be hesitant, just go for it. Go with decision, go with decisiveness, and that's what he's all about. And if you can wrestle the initiative, you've always got the upper hand, right? So think about that in your life. How can you be in the offensive and on the defensive? And guys, that's it. That's 16. I know this video, if it's a bit too long, I'm sorry about that. I'll try to get through it all. But if you want to read the rest of them, so I've got 34, I think, or 36, 34 life lessons of Napoleon. The rest of them are on my blog. So if you go to scottfleer.com/Napoleon, you can give that a read. Let me know what you think. But I hope you enjoyed. Hope you had some insight into this great guy. Maybe destroyed some stereotypes you had of him and preconceived ideas of who he was. And guys, just to let you know, I've got the Revival series on my channel, which is about me documenting the journey regrowing my rugby clothing brand called Rugby Warfare post-COVID. Well, we're still in COVID, but post-first lockdown when all the shit came. If you want to check that out, great. I'm just documenting my journey, and you might learn something if you're looking into growing your own business, Facebook ads, email marketing, whatever it may be. You might get a few 1 or 2 pointers per video. But thanks for watching this video, guys. I've enjoyed doing it. Something I didn't expect that someone I'd expect to be really fascinated by in 2020, but a lot of people have been fascinated by him, clearly, by all the books that have been written about him. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you soon.